let's take some time to talk about an important topic: how to stop causing harm to ourselves. Let's focus on our habits. Not necessarily bad habits, but simply habits. The routines and patterns we perform day after day, often without pausing to consider whether they serve us in any meaningful way. We rarely stop to ask ourselves what benefit these habits bring, whether they help us grow, or whether they limit our potential. When we engage in habitual actions, we often remain stagnant. Our minds do not create new neural pathways. Our curiosity is underutilized, and opportunities for personal growth are missed. In other words, the mechanism that encourages us to explore, to develop, and to expand our horizons is not being activated. Habits form a kind of tunnel, a conditioned path that shapes how we perceive the world. The longer we continue down this tunnel, the more we reinforce its walls, making it increasingly difficult to see beyond them. The longer and more frequently we perform habitual actions, the higher and stronger the walls of this mental and emotional labyrinth become. Over time, we may reach a point where we cease to notice or even comprehend the full complexity of the world around us. The world, with all its intricacies, is far richer and more multidimensional than the narrow confines of our habitual routines would suggest. Consider, for example, a person who consistently arrives at work before dawn and leaves long after sunset. If this pattern becomes their daily rhythm, eventually they may begin to question even the existence of sunlight itself, wondering whether the sun truly exists or if they have merely imagined it. Habit, in such cases, becomes a barrier to development. Even when habits are positive, they can only maintain a baseline level of stability, preventing decline but not promoting growth. Life, in its structure, demands that every individual perform countless daily actions, including habitual ones, simply to sustain existence. This necessity can feel overwhelming, even oppressive, because it can make life seem like a never-ending cycle of repetitive chores. Cleaning, cooking, shopping, working, managing tasks, constant activity just to survive. This realization can be unsettling. It prompts a natural question: when do we actually get to live? What, in its essence, is life? Is life merely a succession of repetitive, routine actions, or is there something deeper, more meaningful? For many, this question can provoke discomfort or even anxiety. Of course, there are healthy and productive habits: going to bed early, waking up early, exercising, thinking independently rather than living under the influence of others' fears. But even these require conscious effort to maintain. Yet, there are also habits we possess whose detrimental impact we rarely acknowledge. Today, let's examine 3 major habits common to almost everyone, explore how they drain our energy and create problems, and consider alternatives that can replace them. These 3 habits not only reduce our vitality, but also create challenges in our lives. The first habit is the tendency to criticize and judge. Criticism, when applied indiscriminately to ordinary actions and people, can be extremely harmful. Naturally, if one is responding to outright malevolence or injustice, denouncing it is an act of reason rather than criticism. But everyday judgment of normal behavior is quite different. Astrologically speaking, criticism originates from the same domain in the horoscope that governs debts and illnesses, the 6th house. This astrological insight is valuable because it implies that unnecessary criticism expands our own sphere of problems and difficulties. In essence, when criticism is not justified by practical utility or purpose, it only amplifies personal challenges, acting as fuel for our own internal struggles. The second habit is the tendency not to set goals. This may sound banal, and many people might object, claiming that they have goals. However, upon closer inspection, what most of us perceive as goals are actually desires, wishes or preferences rather than actionable targets. Desires are formed from the principle of I would like or I wish, but they are not goals in the strict sense. Furthermore, we often mistake the resolution of a problem for a goal. Yet, problems are frequently introduced into our lives precisely to distract us from forming genuine objectives. They act as temporary replacements for real purpose. Until a certain point in life, our goals tend to develop almost automatically, primarily reflecting the fulfillment of basic needs: obtaining an education, securing employment, finding a partner, marrying, and continuing the family line. These are natural objectives, emerging as part of the process of satisfying essential human requirements. However, once these foundational needs are met, many individuals encounter a goal crisis. This occurs because we were not taught how to consciously create meaningful goals. Our parents, our schools, and even life itself rarely instruct us in the art of goal setting. Without deliberate guidance, goals often remain undefined, leaving problems to fill the void as surrogate objectives. By consciously setting goals, we regain control over this process instead of passively waiting for problems to dictate the direction of our lives. The third habit is the tendency to speak negatively about oneself. Astrologically, the house that governs speech is also associated with resources, assets, and income. Language itself is a tool, a vital asset. It enables us to interact with the world, engage with others, and create opportunities. The phrase "in the beginning was the word" reminds us that speech carries enormous potential. By consistently speaking poorly of ourselves, we diminish our ability to access resources and leverage our inherent assets. This habit is widespread, often unnoticed, but its effects are profound. The subconscious mind interprets statements literally, without nuance, sarcasm, or humor. Thus, negative self-talk can have lasting consequences on both perception and potential. Replacing self-criticism with the habit of self-praise is incredibly beneficial. Recognizing and affirming even small accomplishments fosters a healthier self-image and strengthens personal resources. Simple statements like, "I did well to wake up on time today," or "I am proud of myself for preparing a healthy breakfast," can build momentum toward positive change. Everyone has reasons to commend themselves, and deliberately cultivating this habit nurtures self-confidence, energy, and resilience. Breaking these harmful patterns, criticizing others unnecessarily, failing to set meaningful goals, and speaking negatively about oneself, is not merely about self-improvement in a superficial sense. It is about reclaiming energy, rediscovering agency, and allowing our lives to develop beyond the constraints of habit-driven routines. By replacing these detrimental habits with purposeful alternatives, constructive feedback instead of criticism, deliberate goal setting instead of passive desire, and affirmations of self-worth instead of self-deprecation, we transform the very architecture of daily life. Our lives are composed of countless small actions, yet not all of these actions must be dictated by habit alone. The conscious redirection of habitual energy towards growth, awareness, and positivity allows for a richer, more expansive experience. Even ordinary daily routines can become platforms for development if approached with intention. Life then ceases to be merely repetitive motion and becomes a structured path toward personal fulfillment, clarity, and purpose. Each day presents opportunities to align actions with values, desires, and long-term objectives, rather than defaulting to routine. Ultimately, the journey of life is shaped as much by conscious choices as by circumstance. Habits, while often invisible in their cumulative effect, define the boundaries of perception and potential. They can trap us in narrow corridors or empower us to explore broader dimensions of existence. Awareness of these patterns is the first step. From there, deliberate action, choosing habits that sustain, nurture, and elevate, enables the full spectrum of human growth. Self-directed habits, positive goal setting, and mindful language form a triad of practices that energize the mind, strengthen the spirit, and deepen engagement with the world. By understanding the underlying mechanics of habit, we gain insight into the ways we unconsciously limit ourselves, and importantly, how we may expand our capabilities. Every habitual action, every thought, and every spoken word contributes to shaping reality, and thus deserves conscious consideration. Critique, goals, and self-talk are three pivotal arenas where conscious attention can yield profound effects. We are not simply passive observers of life. Even within routines, we hold the power to reshape experiences, to redefine the scope of our days, and to cultivate a life that reflects not only survival but true living. By addressing these core habits, we move beyond mere repetition and enter a space where curiosity, growth, and conscious choice govern our actions. Life, in this sense, is no longer a series of automatic motions, but a continuous unfolding of potential. Each decision, each effort, and each affirmation builds a foundation upon which a more vibrant, empowered existence can flourish. In conclusion, stopping the subtle self-sabotage rooted in habitual thought and action is essential for any meaningful personal development. Criticism drains energy, lack of goals misdirects focus, and negative self-talk undermines resources. By replacing these with constructive, purposeful practices, we reclaim energy, cultivate self-respect, and create a framework for a more fulfilling life. The pathway from automatic routine to conscious growth lies within each of us. Recognition of harmful habits and their replacement with positive, life-enhancing behaviors is the bridge to a more intentional, enriched, and expansive experience of living.